The morning mist clung to London Bridge like a burial shroud. Above it, dozens of severed heads stared down from iron spikes, empty eye sockets warning anyone who passed beneath what defiance cost. But on August 23, 1305, those rotting trophies were about to witness something even worse than their own deaths. They would watch England's most feared enemy dragged through the streets below, naked, chained, and broken, on a journey designed not just to kill him, but to erase him from history. This wasn't justice. This was psychological warfare. William Wallace had once shattered English armies 3 times his size. He had united clans, humiliated kings, and turned rebellion into legend. Now, bound to a wooden hurdle and scraped raw against stone, he was about to learn what King Edward I meant when he promised an example that would echo for centuries. Forget the Hollywood version. What you're about to hear is the documented reality of how medieval law didn't just execute a man, it dismantled him, piece by piece, and scattered what remained across 4 kingdoms.
For nearly 7 years, William Wallace vanished into the Scottish wilderness. He didn't hide in castles. He didn't command armies anymore. He survived on loyalty, secrecy, and the belief that someone, somewhere, was still willing to risk death for him. That belief would cost him everything. By 1305, Scotland was exhausted. Rebellion had been crushed. Nobles who once whispered Wallace's name with pride now spoke it with fear, or not at all. Then came the betrayal. At a quiet farmhouse near Glasgow, a man Wallace trusted sold him for English gold. Historians still argue over the exact moment, but not the outcome. English soldiers burst through the doors before dawn. Wallace fought. Of course he did, but there were too many. Shackles replaced his sword. Chains replaced his freedom. They didn't kill him there. That would have been mercy. Instead, they bound him like a trophy and began a journey meant to humiliate him before it ended him. South, toward London. Every village he passed through was forced to watch. Every stop was deliberate. The message was clear. This is what happens to legends. By the time Wallace reached the capital, he wasn't just a prisoner. He was a warning.
On August 23, 1305, William Wallace was dragged into Westminster Hall. Not escorted, dragged. The hall itself was a monument to English power. Towering stone, banners heavy with royal symbols, judges seated high above the floor. Everything about the space was designed to remind one man how small he had become. Wallace stood alone. He wasn't allowed armor. He wasn't allowed weapons. He wasn't even allowed dignity. The charges were read aloud, one by one. Treason, murder, arson, crimes against the crown. Each accusation was met with silence. This was not a trial meant to determine guilt. That decision had already been made. When Wallace was finally allowed to speak, he didn't beg. He didn't deny the bloodshed. He didn't ask for mercy. He said only this: "I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject." The room froze. In one sentence, Wallace exposed the lie at the heart of the court, that England had no legal claim over a free Scotland. The judges ignored it. They had no intention of debating law or sovereignty. Their purpose was simpler: to make Wallace's death so horrifying that no one would ever follow him again. The verdict was immediate: guilty. And then the sentence was delivered, not as years or imprisonment, but as a ritual of destruction. He would be hanged, but not until dead. He would be disemboweled while conscious. He would be beheaded, and his body divided into 4 parts. Each piece would be sent to a different corner of the kingdom to rot in public view. This was not execution. This was theater, and William Wallace was about to become its centerpiece. The execution took place the same day. There would be no delay, no time for prayer, no chance for the public's anger to cool. William Wallace was dragged from Westminster to Smithfield, tied to a wooden hurdle, pulled through the streets by a horse. His body scraped against stone and filth as crowds gathered along the route. Some shouted, some stared in silence, others watched simply because they had been ordered to. This was not a crowd seeking justice, it was an audience. At the gallows, Wallace was stripped and hoisted into the air, but the rope was measured carefully. He was hanged, but only until the edge of unconsciousness, not long enough to die. When his body went limp, they cut him down, still alive. What followed was the sentence carried out exactly as the law prescribed, methodical, deliberate, and witnessed by hundreds. The executioner worked slowly. This wasn't rage. This was procedure. The crowd watched as England's most famous rebel was dismantled in stages, each one designed to prolong awareness, to ensure the message was fully delivered. Finally, when there was nothing left to prove, Wallace was beheaded. The body was divided into 4 parts, not for burial, for distribution. His head was dipped in tar and mounted on a spike atop London Bridge, joining the others that already lined the crossing. The remaining pieces were sent north: Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, Perth, each displayed in public places where Scots would be forced to see what resistance earned them. England believed this would end the story. They were wrong.
England thought the brutality would crush Scottish resistance. It didn't. Instead, William Wallace became more than a man. He became a symbol. The quarters of his body, displayed in towns across Scotland, were meant as warnings. Instead, they became secret shrines. People travelled in secret to pay homage. Flowers and tokens appeared overnight near the displayed remains, despite strict English prohibitions. The execution had failed to erase his presence. It amplified it. Scottish minstrels composed songs recounting Wallace's courage and defiance. These weren't heroic ballads. They were angry, raw, and unstoppable. The songs spread faster than any army, carrying rebellion from village to village, glen to glen. Even English soldiers who had witnessed the execution whispered of his endurance. A man who had been stripped, dragged, and mutilated, and yet refused to break. The monster they had expected to die became a legend they feared and respected. Robert the Bruce, once a collaborator, reportedly saw the execution as a turning point. Within a year, he raised the standard of rebellion, inspired by Wallace's example. Scotland's fight for freedom, thought ended, ignited anew. Centuries later, Wallace's execution remains etched in memory. Enlightenment thinkers used it as an argument against torture. Romantic nationalists celebrated it as resistance to tyranny. Even today, the story of his defiance reminds the world brutality can destroy bodies, but not ideals. Edward I intended to erase Wallace. Instead, he made him immortal. The Scottish warrior who refused to kneel became the rallying cry for generations. His courage survived where his body could not. And that is the lesson of Smithfield. Some deaths do not silence. They speak louder than life ever could.